Leander Harrington stood alone in the vast, modern living room of his San Francisco penthouse, the panoramic view of the Bay Area spread out before him like a glittering tapestry of ambition and success. Outside, a violent storm raged, the wind howling against the glass and rain lashing the skyline in relentless fury. For Leander, however, the tempest outside was only a mirror of the turmoil within, a maelstrom of anger, betrayal, and a cold, calculated resolve that had driven his every decision for years. Earlier that fateful night, when the clock struck nearly midnight, Leander had confronted Serafina, his young and radiant wife, in a private study lined with books and expensive art. The room, usually suffused with the soft glow of warm lamplight and the gentle hum of classical music, had taken on a stark, almost hostile air. Serafina, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sorrow, had pleaded with him to listen, to understand the truth behind the whispers that had tainted their once happy union. But Leander, hardened by a lifetime of ruthless business and an unyielding belief in facts over feelings, had refused to entertain any explanation. He remembered the way his voice had sounded then, cold, measured, almost devoid of the love that once defined their relationship. "I can't risk everything for a lie," he had said, his words slicing through the silence like a knife. "If you're unfaithful, if you've deceived me in even the slightest way, then you have no place here." In that moment, driven by a combination of unchecked pride and manipulated evidence that had been planted with cunning precision by his conniving sister, Leander had made a decision that would haunt him for decades. Without a second thought, he had ordered her to pack her belongings and leave immediately, his tone leaving no room for debate. Serafina had stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, her eyes pleading silently for mercy and understanding. She had clutched a faded photograph of the two of them, taken on a happier day at the beach, when the future had seemed filled with endless promise, and for one brief moment, time had seemed to stand still. But the crushing weight of Leander's resolve had silenced her pleas. With trembling hands, she had gathered a few personal items, a delicate necklace, a worn leather journal filled with memories of a love once pure, and, without a word, stepped out into the stormy night. The heavy door had closed behind her with a final, resounding thud, marking the end of a life they had once shared. Now, as Leander stared out at the tumultuous cityscape, he was filled with a hollow triumph. The anger he had felt in that moment had gradually transformed into a cold determination to build an empire unburdened by sentimental weakness. Yet, deep inside, even as he buried himself in board meetings and high-stakes negotiations, a shadow of regret began to creep in, a quiet, persistent reminder of the family he had sacrificed at the altar of pride and ambition. In the days that followed, Leander immersed himself in his work. He became known as a man who never allowed personal feelings to interfere with his business decisions, his reputation cemented by his unyielding commitment to success. His penthouse, once a sanctuary of shared dreams and soft laughter, turned into a fortress of solitude where only the echoes of his own ambition resounded. He rarely allowed himself a moment of introspection, but on those rare occasions, the image of Serafina's tear-streaked face would haunt him, a phantom of a love that he had so callously discarded. News of her disappearance spread quickly through the elite social circles of San Francisco, and whispers began to circulate about the scandal that had rocked the towering Harrington legacy. Some speculated that Serafina had left willingly, that she had been complicit in some unspeakable betrayal, while others believed she had been forced into exile by a man too blinded by his own success to see the truth. Leander dismissed the gossip with a haughty sneer, convinced that he had made the right choice, yet every so often, a quiet moment would bring an aching doubt that he could not fully silence. In those moments of solitary reflection, as the storm outside subsided into a haunting calm, Leander would gaze at the remnants of the night, an empty hallway, a forgotten slipper, a half-finished cup of coffee left on the counter, and feel a pang of loss that he attributed to the burdens of leadership rather than personal failing. But even as he denied it outwardly, the memory of Serafina's soft voice, her whispered apologies, and the sorrowful promise in her eyes would occasionally surface, stirring emotions he had long since buried under the weight of his empire. And so, the stage was set, a man who had built his world on cold facts and ruthless ambition now found himself haunted by the ghost of the love he had lost. Unbeknownst to him, the decisions of that stormy night would ripple through time, setting in motion events that would, 20 years later, force him to confront a shocking truth, a truth that would shatter the illusions he had so carefully maintained and challenge everything he believed about love, family, and redemption. As Leander finally turned away from the window, the silence of his penthouse was filled with the unspoken promise of a future that would force him to reckon with the past, a future where the woman he had once cast out would return, not only with the son he had never known but with a revelation so profound that it would demand he confront the very core of his identity. In that final, lingering moment before the night gave way to the uncertain light of dawn, Leander's heart beat a slow, mournful rhythm, a rhythm that would soon change, irrevocably, in ways he could scarcely imagine. 20 years passed in a blur of boardroom battles, high-stakes mergers, and relentless ambition. Leander Harrington transformed completely during that long stretch. Once a man torn by the anguished memory of one fateful night, he gradually molded himself into an icon of ruthless success. His sprawling San Francisco penthouse, once a sanctuary of bittersweet memories, became a fortress of solitude and calculation. The storm of emotions that had roared through him on that bitter night slowly subsided into a quiet, unyielding determination. Every day, as he strode through the gleaming corridors of his corporate headquarters, Leander carried himself with an air of invincibility, the ghost of regret tucked away behind layers of carefully constructed ambition. In the years following Serafina's abrupt departure, society had whispered of scandal and betrayal, yet Leander rose above the gossip with a steely focus on his empire. He expanded his business interests into new markets and diversified his portfolio, leaving little doubt that he was a man who trusted only in hard facts and cold logic. The memory of Serafina, though always present in the recesses of his mind, had become a distant echo, a painful reminder that he had once chosen pride over love. At times, in the quiet moments just before dawn when the city was hushed and the only sound was the soft ticking of an antique clock in his study, Leander would catch himself lost in thought. He would recall Serafina's tear-streaked face, the sound of her quiet pleas, and for a fleeting second, a pang of guilt would remind him of the price he had paid for his unyielding pride. Outside the world of business, Leander's personal life had grown increasingly isolated. He attended lavish parties and charity events, always the impeccable host and flawless speaker, yet he never allowed anyone to breach the emotional walls he had built. His colleagues marveled at his brilliance, but none suspected the torment that lay beneath his polished exterior. In his eyes, every decision was measured solely by its impact on his bottom line, and personal attachments were nothing more than distractions from his true mission, domination of his industry. Despite this relentless drive, the decades had not been entirely devoid of moments of introspection. On rare, solitary evenings, Leander would walk slowly along the quiet, empty corridors of his penthouse, passing by rooms that once echoed with laughter and love. In the silence, memories of happier times would surface, brief flashes of a past when Serafina's warmth had filled their home, when hope had seemed tangible and the future brimming with promise. Those moments were fleeting, quickly swallowed by the cold resolve of his current self, yet they lingered like a bittersweet perfume in the recesses of his mind. In the midst of this transformed existence, the world outside continued its relentless pace. Newspapers reported on the astonishing rise of the Harrington conglomerate, and Leander's face adorned billboards and magazine covers as the epitome of success. Still, behind the carefully curated image of wealth and power, a quiet void remained, one that he had long convinced himself was necessary to preserve his empire. Deep down, he wondered whether the relentless pursuit of success had come at the expense of the very love he had once known, though he buried such doubts beneath layers of ambition and calculated indifference. Leander rarely allowed himself to reflect on the irony of his existence. A man who had built his life on the certainty of cold, hard facts now found himself haunted by the very intangible memories of a love he had rejected. And yet, in his solitude, there was also an unspoken resolve, the promise that one day, fate might force him to confront the secrets of his past. In the quiet hours before the city awoke, as the gentle light of dawn filtered through his floor-to-ceiling windows, Leander would stare out at the twinkling cityscape, a subtle longing hidden in his eyes. It was as if he anticipated that the life he had built, though impressive and formidable, was missing one irreplaceable piece. Though outwardly he remained the embodiment of control and success, in his private moments, Leander began to sense that the events of that long-ago, stormy night were not as distant as he wished. Unbeknownst to him, the path of his destiny was slowly converging toward a collision with his past, a past that would soon demand reckoning. The steady hum of the city below, the silent tick of the clock in his study, and the faint memories of a love he had abandoned all whispered of an inevitable return, a return that would force him to confront the truth about himself, his lost love, and the son he never knew existed. In the hushed solitude of his penthouse, as the storm outside gave way to a tentative dawn, Leander Harrington remained unaware that the very foundation of his meticulously constructed world was about to be shaken, a revelation that would alter the course of his life forever and test the limits of his hardened heart. That in the midst of an opulent charity gala held at a grand San Francisco ballroom, Leander Harrington found himself reluctantly present among the city's elite, a calculated appearance to bolster his reputation as the unyielding titan of industry. He stood aloof near a marble pillar, his face stoic and unreadable, when the doors swung open abruptly. A young man, tall and striking with eyes that mirrored Leander's own piercing gaze, stepped into the room. The crowd fell silent, and for a suspended moment, time seemed to slow down. "Excuse me," the young man announced in a calm yet commanding tone that carried throughout the hall. "My name is Ellis Harrington. I believe I'm your son." The words echoed in Leander's mind like a thunderclap. His heart pounded violently as he took in the young man's features, a perfect blend of his own chiseled jawline and the soft, warm eyes that he'd once seen in Seraphina's gentle gaze. Shock and disbelief warred within him, and for a long, breathless moment, he could only stare. Before Leander could muster a reply, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. Seraphina, now a woman of grace and quiet dignity, moved toward them with measured steps. Her presence sent a ripple of murmurs through the onlookers. In her eyes, there was a mix of sorrow and determination, a story of loss and resilience etched deeply in her expression. "Leander," she said softly but clearly, "I never stopped loving you. And I never wanted to hurt you, even if you never believed me." Her voice, though measured, trembled with years of unspoken pain and regret. Leander's voice came out harshly, laced with both disbelief and repressed anguish. "How is this possible, Seraphina? 20 years, and now you return with a man claiming to be my son?" His tone was incredulous, as if each word was a blow to his long-hardened heart. Seraphina stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes, Leander. That man is our son, Ellis. He was born the night after you drove me out, a secret I've carried all these years. I did it to protect you, or so I believed, and to spare you from any further heartache." Her words spilled out with a blend of sorrow and a hint of defiance. Ellis interjected quietly, his voice steady despite the charged atmosphere. "I don't expect you to accept me immediately, Mr. Harrington. But I'm here because I need your help. I have a rare heart condition that only someone with your genetic makeup can cure. I don't want to be seen as a burden, I just want to live." The gravity of his words hit Leander like a tidal wave. The room was filled with tense silence as every eye in the ballroom turned toward him. In that moment, Leander's mind raced, wrestling with a lifetime of suppressed guilt, unhealed wounds, and the stark realization that he had been a part of a cruel misunderstanding. His expression hardened, yet there was a flicker of something new, regret, perhaps, or even hope. "How can I believe any of this?" Leander demanded, his voice quivering slightly with a mix of anger and pain. "How can you prove that you're truly my son?" Seraphina reached out, her hand trembling as she gently took Leander's arm. "We have the answers, Leander. Genetic tests have been completed. Ellis, will you show him?" she implored softly. Ellis nodded, and with a steady calm, he produced a small folder from his jacket. Inside were the official test results, printed on crisp white paper with undeniable clarity, a 99.99% probability of parentage. Leander's eyes flicked rapidly over the document, his face unreadable for a long, agonizing minute. Finally, he looked up, the conflict in his eyes belying his stoic exterior. It appears you are indeed my son," he said in a strained whisper, barely audible above the murmur of the assembled crowd. A heavy silence enveloped the room. Leander's mind reeled as he struggled to reconcile the man before him with the bitter memory of the night he had cast out Seraphina, a night that had seemed to seal his fate forever. Now, confronted with undeniable evidence and the return of the woman he had once loved, he felt an overwhelming tide of regret and longing. Seraphina's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she stepped closer, her voice soft but unwavering. "I did what I thought was best, Leander. I was afraid of losing you completely. But I never stopped caring for you, for us, and for Ellis." Leander looked deeply into her eyes, a war of emotions raging behind his steely facade. His hardened exterior cracked just a little, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. "I've spent 20 years burying that part of me, convinced that I could build an empire on facts and profit. But now, I'm not sure if I can trust myself or anyone again." Ellis, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke with a voice that was both mature and gentle. "I know this is hard, and I'm sorry for all the pain my existence might cause you, Mr. Harrington. I'm not asking for your love right away, just a chance to be a part of this family and to have a father who can help me live." Leander's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he looked at Ellis, a living reminder of a love lost and a future betrayed. "I never thought I'd see this day," he murmured slowly, his voice laden with regret. "I cast you away before you were even born, and now I must try to reclaim what I lost." The atmosphere was thick with emotion as the three stood together amidst the hushed whispers of the gala's attendees. Outside, the storm had subsided, leaving a quiet calm that belied the turbulent emotions within. Leander, burdened with years of solitude and hardened by ambition, felt a stirring of hope, a chance, however fragile, to atone for past mistakes and perhaps, one day, rebuild the love he had so recklessly shattered. As the night wore on, with the crowd dispersing slowly, Leander retreated into the quiet confines of his penthouse, his mind racing with doubts and desires. In that moment, everything he had built felt suddenly uncertain, as if the truth he had long denied was now demanding a reckoning. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if fate had finally come calling to force him to confront not only the son he never knew, but also the woman he had once scorned, a confrontation that might change everything he believed about love, trust, and redemption. Leander returned to his penthouse in a daze, the weight of revelations pressing heavily on his chest. The echoes of the gala still reverberated in his mind, the stunned silence of the crowd, the hesitant confession in Seraphina's eyes, and the steady, determined tone of Ellis's voice. Now, alone in the vast, echoing corridors of his home, he sank into the leather armchair in his study, a room lined with dark mahogany bookshelves and priceless art that once symbolized his unyielding success. But tonight, all of that felt meaningless. Every polished surface, every gleaming trophy, seemed to mock him with reminders of the love he had destroyed. Leander's thoughts tumbled back to that fateful confrontation, when he had cast out Seraphina with such brutal finality, when he had believed the damning evidence, manipulated so artfully by his own sister Cordelia. His mind replayed the cold words he had uttered, the harsh decree that had driven her away, leaving behind only silence and regret. Now, the presence of Ellis, the son he had never known, and the return of the woman he had once scorned, stirred a storm of conflicting emotions that he could no longer keep at bay. He reached out for a glass of scotch, but the amber liquid only reminded him of countless nights spent drowning his guilt. His eyes fell on an old photograph pinned to the wall, a captured moment of happier times, him and Seraphina, laughing together on a sunlit beach, carefree and hopeful. The image, once a treasured memory, now burned with a bittersweet intensity. "What have I done?" he whispered into the silence, the sound of his own voice a harsh indictment. Unable to remain in isolation any longer, Leander picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in decades. When the line finally connected, his voice cracked as he spoke, "Serafina. I need to see you." There was a long pause, and then a soft, hesitant reply, as if she too was cautiously testing the waters of a reunion. Their conversation was sparse at first, filled with awkward pauses and tentative words. She told him that she had not forgotten him, that the years had only deepened the wounds of abandonment, and yet, a small part of her had always clung to hope. Leander listened in silence, tears threatening to spill as he realized the magnitude of his loss. Later that evening, Leander found himself standing before a full-length mirror in the quiet of his study. His reflection stared back at him, a man in his 40s, his once commanding eyes now clouded with remorse and uncertainty. "I built my empire on these walls," he thought bitterly, "but none of it can fill the void left by losing her." The image of Serafina's tearful goodbye haunted him. Every regret, every misstep, echoed in the stillness of that moment, and for the first time in years, Leander allowed himself to feel the depth of his failure. Determined to confront the past head-on, Leander gathered every scrap of evidence he had meticulously stored away, the letters Serafina had left behind, the legal documents that cordoned off her exit, even the manipulated photographs that had set the tragic chain of events into motion. He spread them out on his large oak desk, each piece a painful reminder of the moment he had chosen pride over love. His mind churned with questions. What if he had listened? Could he have saved her? And, most painfully, how could he now atone for the years he had squandered in bitterness? As midnight approached, the soft chime of the grandfather clock punctuated his turbulent thoughts. In the quiet solitude of the night, Leander made a promise to himself, a vow that he would seek redemption, that he would do everything in his power to mend the broken bonds with the woman he had once loved and the son he had never known. Yet even as he resolved to change, he was painfully aware that the path to forgiveness would be long and fraught with difficult truths. Before retiring for the night, Leander sat at his desk and penned a letter he never intended to send, but one that poured out every regret, every apology he could no longer hold inside. His hand shook as he wrote, the ink bleeding into the paper like the tears he could not shed openly. In that solitary moment, Leander's voice, though unspoken, filled the room with raw, unfiltered sorrow and a desperate hope for reconciliation. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the high windows, Leander had written nearly a full page of heartfelt admissions. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, a secret testament to his inner transformation. As sleep finally claimed him, Leander's last conscious thought was of Serafina, of the possibility that one day, maybe, she might read these words and see that beneath his hardened exterior lay a man who had truly regretted his past misdeeds. In the quiet hours before morning, Leander's world, built so firmly on ambition and denial, began to crumble. The unresolved pain of his past was no longer a distant memory, it was a living, breathing part of him that would soon demand to be acknowledged. And so, in that stillness, the stage was set for the next chapter, a chapter where the long-forgotten love of Serafina would force Leander to face his own heart, and where the legacy of a shattered past would pave the way for an uncertain, yet hopeful, future. The next morning, as a pale sunrise crept over San Francisco, Leander woke with a heavy heart and a renewed sense of purpose. The revelations of the night still echoed in his mind, Serafina's tearful eyes, Ellis's quiet determination, and his own guilt-stricken silence. Determined to break free from decades of regret, he resolved to reach out to the two people he had once cast aside, to attempt to mend the shattered fragments of his family. Over a cup of black coffee in his study, where the remnants of his unsent letter still lay folded in a drawer, Leander reread every painful word he had written. Each sentence was a confession, a plea for forgiveness that he never had the courage to deliver. Now, with the weight of 20 years pressing upon him, he knew that the time had come to confront his past. Without further delay, he picked up the phone and dialed Serafina's number, a number he had not dared to call in all these years. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before a hesitant voice answered. "Leander?" Her voice trembled with caution and a faint glimmer of hope. "I'm sorry for disturbing you, but I need to see you and Ellis." I want to try to make things right, he said, his voice low and filled with raw emotion. There was a long pause on the other end, and then she said softly, "Meet me at the old Rosewood Cafe this afternoon. I'll be there." Leander hung up, a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling in his chest. It was a small step, a step toward reconciliation, and yet it carried the promise of a fresh start. Later that day, in the modest warmth of the Rosewood Cafe, Leander arrived early, his eyes scanning the room nervously. Every creak of the wooden floor seemed to echo his own uncertain heartbeat. When he finally saw Serafina seated at a corner table, her posture straight but her gaze distant, he felt a surge of regret and longing. Across from her sat a young man, Ellis, quiet and reserved, his presence a constant reminder of what he had lost and what he might yet reclaim. Serafina looked up as Leander approached. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them was thick with the weight of unspoken words and memories of a bitter past. Finally, Leander broke the silence. "Serafina," he said softly, "I know I can never undo what I did, but I want to try. I want to make amends, to be a part of your life again, to be a father to Ellis in every way I can." Her eyes, filled with a cautious mix of sorrow and hope, searched his face. "Leander, it's not that simple. I've spent 20 years trying to live without you, carrying the pain of your rejection every day. I built a life for myself and for Ellis, a life that wasn't supposed to include you." Ellis shifted in his seat, his gaze flickering between his parents, a silent witness to the chasm that had divided them for so long. Leander's voice wavered as he continued, "I understand that. I understand I hurt you deeply, and I know I can't expect forgiveness overnight. But I've spent every day since that night trying to bury the regret, only to realize that the void in my heart only grew larger. I want to fix this. I want to be here for Ellis, and I want to have a chance to love you properly, without the weight of the past crushing us." A heavy silence followed his words. Serafina's gaze fell to her hands, which trembled slightly as she tried to steady herself. "I've often wondered if you ever regretted it," she whispered. "Every day, I carried the pain of your departure. I had no choice but to survive on my own, to protect Ellis from further hurt. But sometimes, I wondered if you ever missed me, if you ever wished things had been different." Leander's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he leaned forward, his tone earnest and desperate. "I missed you every single day, Serafina. And I missed Ellis, our chance to be a family. I was blinded by pride and manipulation, and I threw away the one thing that truly mattered. I know I can't change the past, but I'm begging you, give me a chance to make up for it." Ellis, who had been listening quietly, spoke up in a soft, measured tone, "I don't know if I can forget everything right away, Dad, but I want to try. I want to understand who I really am, and that starts with knowing the truth about my family." His words, fragile yet sincere, hung in the air like a fragile promise of healing. Serafina's eyes met Leander's once more, and for the first time, a glimmer of forgiveness appeared amidst the pain. "I'm not saying it will be easy," she said slowly. "But maybe, if we're honest with each other, we can find a way to rebuild something that's real. Not for the sake of our past, but for Ellis, for our future." Leander nodded, his heart pounding with both hope and uncertainty. "I'm willing to try," he murmured. "I'll do whatever it takes." For a long time, they sat there in quiet conversation, sharing tentative memories and discussing the possibility of slowly reuniting as a family. They talked about small things first, how to help Ellis with his treatment, how to establish a new routine that allowed for healing, and then, as the hours passed, deeper emotions emerged. Leander confessed the guilt that had tormented him for years, while Serafina recounted the struggles of living in exile, of having to rebuild her life from fragments of shattered dreams. Outside, the cafe bustled with life, yet in that secluded corner, time seemed to slow, allowing them to share their vulnerabilities in a way that felt both dangerous and liberating. As the afternoon waned into the soft hues of early evening, the three of them left the cafe together. The air was crisp, and for a brief moment, Leander felt as if he were stepping into a new world, a world where forgiveness and love might someday heal the deepest wounds. He drove them back to his penthouse in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. That night, long after Ellis was tucked into bed and Serafina had retired to her room, Leander remained in his study, staring at the unfinished letter he had written the night before. The words of remorse, of longing, of hope, continued to pour from his pen, yet he couldn't bring himself to send it. Instead, he kept it hidden, a silent vow to himself that he would work every day to be the father and partner he had once lost. In that solitary moment, Leander's mind wandered back to the stormy night that had changed everything. He recalled the bitter finality of his words, the coldness in his eyes as he sent Serafina away, and he wondered if perhaps fate had given him a second chance. He resolved that he would do everything in his power to honor that chance, not just for himself, but for Ellis, and for the woman he had once scorned. As the first light of dawn began to filter through his window, Leander closed his journal and exhaled deeply. He knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in 20 years, hope stirred within him, a hope that, with time, forgiveness, and unwavering effort, the shattered pieces of his past might finally be pieced together into something whole and beautiful. Leander's resolve hardened as he stepped away from the media storm that had erupted around his family. The relentless barrage of scandalous headlines and public outcry had left him no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He retreated to his private study in the penthouse, a spacious, dimly lit room lined with mahogany shelves and mementos of a once happy past, and set to work. Determined to unravel the tangled web of deceit spun by his treacherous sister, Cordelia, he knew that every secret and every manipulated piece of evidence had to be exposed. Late into the night, as rain drummed softly against the expansive windows, Leander gathered every scrap of documentation he had secretly preserved over the years, letters, emails, and even the forged photographs that had once convinced him of Serafina's betrayal. He spread them out on his large oak desk, each item a painful reminder of a decision that had cost him dearly. His mind churned with questions: how much of it was true, and how much was carefully orchestrated lies? His anger mingled with a desperate need for redemption, fueling his determination to uncover the truth behind Cordelia's cruel manipulations. The next morning, Leander contacted Gideon Blake, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous work and unflinching dedication to justice. Over a series of tense phone calls, Leander explained his suspicions, that Cordelia had not only fabricated evidence against Serafina, but had also manipulated crucial documents, and even interfered with legal correspondences, to ensure that he would remain estranged from the woman he once loved and from the son he never knew existed. Gideon's voice was low and measured as he promised to delve deeply into Cordelia's past activities, tracing financial records, intercepting secret emails, and even interviewing former family employees who might hold fragments of the truth. Days turned into a blur of clandestine meetings and late-night phone conversations. Leander found himself poring over reams of data in his study, the soft hum of his computer and the steady patter of rain his only companions. Slowly, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Gideon reported that Cordelia had systematically sabotaged every attempt Serafina made to reach out to him after that terrible night. Records indicated that she had intercepted letters and even altered hospital documents, ensuring that every communication painted Serafina in a false light. One file, in particular, caught Leander's eye, a series of forged bank statements and email exchanges that suggested Cordelia had diverted funds meant for Serafina's legal support, redirecting them instead to shell companies under her control. One evening, as Leander scrutinized these documents with trembling hands, his phone rang abruptly. It was Gideon. "Leander, I've found something significant," the investigator said, his tone urgent. "There's an internal memo from 10 years ago that explicitly orders the alteration of Serafina's medical records, orders that bear Cordelia's signature. It appears she wanted to ensure that any trace of Serafina's rightful claim to our family's legacy would vanish." Leander's heart pounded, each word from Gideon like a hammer blow. "I need to see that memo," he demanded, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. Send it to me immediately. As the digital file arrived, Leander spent hours in front of his computer, each page deepening his sense of betrayal. The memo was damning. It laid out a calculated plan to erase any evidence that could link Serafina to the family, all orchestrated by Cordelia. In that moment, Leander felt a surge of rage that mixed bitterly with remorse, a realization that his own pride and blind trust had allowed Cordelia to destroy the only love he had ever known. With newfound clarity, Leander resolved that he would confront Cordelia directly. He arranged a discreet meeting at the old Harrington estate, a mansion steeped in memories of happier times, now an echo of family discord. The day was overcast, the sky a somber gray as he arrived alone, his footsteps echoing in the deserted halls. In the grand drawing room, draped in heavy velvet curtains and illuminated by the soft glow of antique chandeliers, Cordelia awaited him, her expression unreadable and cool. "Leander," she greeted him, her voice silky and condescending, "I've been expecting you." Leander's eyes burned with controlled fury as he stepped forward. "Cordelia, I know everything. I know about the forged documents, the altered records, everything you did to keep Serafina away from me and to make me doubt her. How could you betray our family like this?" For a long, tense moment, Cordelia said nothing. Then, with a slow, almost mocking smile, she replied, "You were too weak to see the truth, dear brother. I did what had to be done to preserve our legacy. Serafina was a threat to everything we built. You, in your naive idealism, refused to accept that sacrifice." Leander's voice trembled with a mixture of outrage and sorrow. "Sacrifice? You poisoned the very well of our family, Cordelia. Your manipulations tore us apart. I cast her out, believing your lies, and now I'm left with a void that no amount of success can fill." Cordelia's eyes flashed dangerously as she stepped closer. "Perhaps you deserve that void, Leander. Perhaps you are not as infallible as you pretend to be. I did what was necessary to maintain control that you've squandered with your foolish pride." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and regret. Leander's fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I will not allow you to continue destroying lives for your own gain. I will expose every lie you've ever told, every manipulation you've orchestrated. The truth will come to light, and you will pay for what you've done." Cordelia's laughter was cold and bitter. "We shall see, brother. The world is not so easily swayed by your sentimentality." Before Leander could press further, a sudden crash echoed from outside, interrupting their confrontation. The distant sound of shattering glass, followed by the muffled rumble of approaching sirens, signaled that the storm he had been fighting within was now erupting in the world beyond the estate's walls. Cordelia's face momentarily faltered, and Leander realized that her empire of deceit was already crumbling. "You have no idea, Cordelia," he whispered fiercely. "No matter how far you try to hide, the truth will always find a way to break through." With those final words, Leander turned and left the drawing room, the sound of his determined footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Outside, the dark clouds parted slightly to reveal a sliver of hope, a promise that the reckoning was at hand. He knew that the path to redemption would be long and fraught with painful truths, but he was ready. The battle for his family's honor, for the love he had once so recklessly discarded, had truly begun. Back at his penthouse, Leander sat alone in his study, the evidence of Cordelia's treachery spread before him like a roadmap to his own salvation. With a renewed determination, he resolved that every lie would be unraveled, every secret exposed. For the first time in 20 years, he vowed to reclaim not only his legacy but also the love he had lost, a love that might yet be restored, if he had the courage to face the past head-on. Leander returned to the chaos of the public arena with a renewed determination. The scandal that Cordelia had unleashed was now a wildfire, one that threatened not only to destroy his reputation but also to shatter the fragile reconciliation he'd begun with Serafina and the hope he now placed in Ellis. The media's relentless scrutiny, the barrage of sensational headlines, and the court summons forced him to confront his past head-on. With Serafina by his side and Ellis's health a constant reminder of the stakes, Leander resolved to fight back and reclaim his family's honor. The legal battle began in a crowded courtroom, its marble floors polished to a mirror shine and high ceilings that seemed to echo the voices of every argument. Leander sat at the defense table, flanked by his trusted attorney, Grant Aldrich, and a team of forensic experts who had meticulously pieced together evidence that exposed Cordelia's intricate web of lies. The opposing counsel, a slick, confident lawyer representing the media conglomerate that had fueled the scandal, wasted no time in trying to paint Serafina as the deceitful villain. However, every accusation was met with irrefutable evidence, documents, email exchanges, and recorded conversations, that left little room for doubt. Throughout the trial, Leander delivered an impassioned statement from the witness stand. His voice, though measured, trembled with raw emotion as he recounted the long, bitter years he had spent rejecting love out of pride. "I built my empire on facts," he declared, "but in doing so, I allowed bitterness and deceit to rule my heart. I was blinded by manipulated lies, and I cast out the one person who truly deserved my trust." His words, punctuated by the quiet hum of the courtroom, resonated deeply with everyone present, drawing sympathetic murmurs from the gallery. Serafina, summoned as a key witness, stepped into the courtroom with a quiet dignity that belied her inner turmoil. Her testimony was calm yet piercing. She spoke of the pain of exile, the struggle to protect Ellis, and the deep remorse that had haunted her ever since that stormy night when Leander had banished her. "I never sought to harm our family," she explained softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I only ever wanted to protect our child and the fragile hope that one day, truth would prevail." Her testimony, delivered with heartfelt sincerity, began to turn the tide of public opinion, slowly chipping away at the narrative that had been force-fed by Cordelia's machinations. Outside the courtroom, the media buzzed with every development. For weeks, Leander and Serafina were hounded by reporters, their every move scrutinized and debated on live television. But gradually, as evidence mounted and the truth of Cordelia's manipulations became undeniable, public sentiment began to shift. Influential business leaders and respected members of society rallied to Leander's side, praising his courage in the face of adversity and his willingness to admit his past mistakes. Editorials in major newspapers lauded the reunited family for their resilience, calling their journey a testament to the transformative power of love and forgiveness. Amid the legal battles, Ellis remained at the center of it all. His rare heart condition had necessitated further surgeries, and his struggle for life became a poignant symbol of the family's own fight for redemption. In quiet hospital corridors, Leander would often be seen holding Ellis's hand, whispering words of hope and promise, while Serafina's gentle presence provided a comforting anchor in the storm of uncertainty. As the trial reached its climax, Leander's legal team presented one final piece of evidence, a series of internal memos and forged documents that laid bare Cordelia's deceit. The memos, painstakingly recovered from old archives and authenticated by independent experts, proved beyond doubt that Cordelia had not only fabricated the evidence of Serafina's supposed betrayal but had orchestrated every attempt to alienate her from Leander's life. The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the overwhelming evidence, and a palpable sense of justice began to settle in. In a dramatic ruling that sent shockwaves through both the legal and business communities, the judge declared Cordelia's actions as deliberate and malicious, stripping her of any claim over the Harrington legacy. The court ordered a full retraction of all defamatory statements, and Leander was publicly exonerated. For the first time in decades, he stood in the glare of public vindication, not as a defeated man haunted by regret, but as a father and leader who had confronted his own flaws and reclaimed his honor. In the aftermath, as reporters clamored for comment and the media buzz slowly subsided, Leander returned to his penthouse with Serafina. The journey through the legal labyrinth had been grueling, but it had also opened the door to healing. In the quiet aftermath, Leander found himself overwhelmed by the enormity of what he had learned, that pride and deceit could be undone only by courage and honesty. That night, in the solitude of his study, Leander penned a new letter. Unlike the unsent confession of years past, this one was a declaration of renewal, a promise to rebuild his family on the foundations of truth, compassion, and genuine love. As he wrote, he thought of Serafina's unwavering strength, of Ellis's brave resilience, and of the hope that now glowed like a beacon in the darkness. The legal battle had not erased the past, nor would it ever fully heal the wounds it had caused, but it had marked the beginning of a long, painstaking process of redemption. Leander resolved that he would spend the rest of his days making amends, not just to his family, but to himself. And in the quiet moments, as he gazed out at the city lights that had once symbolized his solitary ambition, he now saw them as sparks of a future filled with possibility. In that final, silent moment before sleep claimed him, Leander understood that the battle for redemption was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, inevitable twists of fate that might once again test the bonds of family and love. But with Serafina by his side and Ellis's hopeful smile lighting the darkness, he was ready to face whatever came next, determined to prove that even the deepest betrayals could be overcome by the enduring power of forgiveness and love. The months that followed the legal and personal upheaval brought a cautious calm to the Harrington household. Slowly, the bitter memories and betrayals that had once loomed over Leander, Serafina, and Ellis began to soften into scars, reminders of a past that had forged them into a stronger, if more fragile, family. With Cordelia behind bars and the media frenzy finally subsiding, the three of them set about rebuilding their lives, determined to create a future defined not by old wounds but by new beginnings. Late one crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the San Francisco skyline and bathed the city in a warm, golden glow, Leander, Serafina, and Ellis gathered in the intimate garden of their newly reclaimed estate. The garden, adorned with blooming chrysanthemums and winding ivy, was a sanctuary away from prying eyes, a place where they could speak honestly, laugh freely, and finally begin to heal. In that serene atmosphere, the lingering bitterness of past deceptions gave way to a tentative hope that, perhaps, forgiveness could flourish once again. Leander, now a man who bore the weight of his mistakes with quiet dignity, spoke first as they sat on a stone bench beneath a centuries-old oak tree. His voice, though low and measured, trembled with raw sincerity. "I have spent too many years building walls around my heart, believing that my success was proof of my invulnerability. But standing here with both of you, I realize that true strength lies in admitting our faults and allowing love to mend what was broken." His eyes, once hardened by ambition and regret, shone with a renewed vulnerability that surprised even him. Serafina, her face softening as she listened to his earnest words, reached out and took his hand gently. "Leander, I have carried the pain of your rejection all these years. I built a life out of necessity, protecting myself and Ellis from further hurt. Yet, despite everything, I never stopped believing that love could prevail. Today, seeing you here, I feel that maybe we can finally find the peace we so desperately need." Her voice, though quivering with emotion, held an unyielding strength, a promise of renewal that resonated deeply with both Leander and Ellis. Ellis, who had long navigated the turbulent waters of his identity, finally spoke up in a voice that blended youthful earnestness with the wisdom of someone who had seen too much too soon. "I've spent my life wondering who I truly belong to. I was raised in the shadow of scandal and deceit, but I have learned that family isn't defined solely by blood. It's built through trust, shared pain, and the courage to forgive. I stand here today, not as a symbol of past mistakes, but as proof that our future can be different, stronger and filled with love." His words, sincere and resolute, brought a solemn nod from both his parents. That night, as they parted ways, the family felt a tentative but profound unity. Leander returned to his study, the memory of the evening lingering in his mind like a warm ember. Yet, even as he embraced this fragile new beginning, a persistent anxiety gnawed at him, a nagging voice reminding him that the past was never truly behind them. He recalled the final note Cordelia had left, a chilling reminder that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of re-emerging when least expected. Several weeks later, just as winter's first chill began to weave through the streets of San Francisco, a knock at the door disrupted the quiet of the penthouse. Leander opened the door to find an elegantly dressed courier holding a thick, unmarked envelope. With trembling hands, he brought the envelope to his study, his mind already racing with apprehension. He slowly opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper, its message typed in a cold, impersonal font: "Your happiness is built on lies, remember, nothing is ever as it seems." The note sent a shiver down his spine, yet instead of collapsing under the weight of its threat, Leander felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. He had endured so much already: betrayals, legal battles, the loss of years, and now he would not allow one more twist of fate to undermine the family he had fought so hard to rebuild. He tore the note into pieces, scattering them into the wastebasket, a symbolic gesture of his determination to rise above the past. In the days that followed, Leander, Seraphina, and Ellis continued to nurture their fragile peace. They took long walks along the waterfront, sharing stories of their childhood and dreams for the future. Seraphina found solace in her art, often painting the sunsets over the bay, a reflection of both beauty and bittersweet remembrance. Leander, once consumed by the cold pursuit of business success, began to embrace the softer moments, learning to value the quiet joy of familial love over the endless quest for power. Then, on a crisp spring morning, as flowers began to bloom and the air carried the promise of renewal, a long-awaited miracle unfolded. At a routine checkup for Ellis, doctors discovered that his rare heart condition, once considered life-threatening, had improved dramatically. The key, they explained, had been the unorthodox, but genuine, genetic match he shared with Leander, a match that had been preserved in the midst of all the chaos. The news brought tears of joy and disbelief. For Ellis, it signified not only a second chance at life but a future unburdened by the lingering shadow of scandal. In a small, intimate celebration that evening, the family gathered in their home. Candles flickered gently, and soft music played in the background as they shared a quiet dinner. Leander raised his glass, his eyes locking with Seraphina's as he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "For 20 years, I believed that success could fill the void left by my own hubris. But nothing compares to the love and forgiveness I now have before me. Today, I pledge to rebuild not just my empire, but our family, with honesty, compassion, and a commitment to cherish every moment we have." Seraphina's eyes glistened with tears as she replied softly, "We have all suffered, but together, we have discovered that the power to heal lies within us. Our future is not defined by the secrets and betrayals of the past, but by our courage to love unconditionally." Ellis, sitting quietly between them, smiled with a newfound sense of belonging, a testament to the resilience that had carried them through their darkest hours. As the night deepened, and the city outside slumbered beneath a star-strewn sky, Leander, Seraphina, and Ellis stood together on the balcony, gazing out over the illuminated bay. They were not naive, they understood that the scars of the past might never fully fade. Yet in that moment, fortified by their shared journey of redemption, they chose to believe that love was stronger than any secret, stronger than any betrayal. The whispered threats of the past, though not entirely forgotten, no longer held sway over their hearts. In the gentle silence of that final hour, as a cool breeze stirred the leaves around them, the Harrington family embraced the promise of a new dawn. They had faced the worst that life could throw at them: deceit, betrayal, scandal, and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably transformed. And together, they vowed to face whatever the future might bring, hand in hand, hearts united by the unbreakable bond of forgiveness and enduring love.